The divide deepens.
From the Battelle studio at WOSU at COSI, this is Columbus on the Record. Joining Mike Thompson this week, Laura Bischoff, State House reporter for the Dayton Daily News. Karen Kassler, State House bureau chief for Ohio Public Radio and TV. Joseph Moss of the Ohio Hispanic Coalition, and Michael Miller, former Franklin County prosecutor.
The nation's divisions, politically and racially, were never more on display than they were this week. That divide exploded in Dallas when a Black Lives Matter protest started peacefully but ended in gunfire, an ambush that killed 5 police officers and wounded 7 others. Police say the suspect told them he targeted white police officers.
We are heartbroken. There are no words to describe the atrocity that occurred to our city. All I know is that this must stop, this divisiveness between our police and our citizens.
The violence followed 2 police-involved shootings caught on camera this week. The first in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, where Alton Sterling was killed. The second in suburban St. Paul, Minnesota, where a woman filmed the moments after an officer shot her boyfriend, Philando Castile. Mike Miller, you have spent your career as working for the FBI, as a prosecutor, as a defense attorney. How do you view the events of the past week?
Well, I think any way you look at it, it's tragic. It's just so tragic, I can't believe it. I think it's been a terrible ordeal for the country to go through. The things in Baton Rouge and Minneapolis were one thing, and then culminated by this incident in Dallas is just, it's just heart-wrenching. I am taking some solace, as I learned, I think, a short while ago. The report this morning said there were 4 people and so forth, and now apparently they're down to 1. And I certainly hope that's true. I can certainly understand one person, going off his rocker and doing something tragically, and that even though the results are the same, it's better to me than that there were 4 people who jointly planned it and so on. But it's, Mike, we've had this for so many years, and every time you think it gets better, it seems to get worse. And I don't know the answer to it. I wish I did, but I don't know. It seems like all the acts that I've seen, without prejudging anything, but all 3 of those things, from Baton Rouge to Minneapolis to Dallas, there's just no excuse for them, and I just hate to see somebody react and try and, the old bromide, taking the law in your own hands, and that's what happened. I think those officers in the Minnesota and Louisiana are in for a long road.
Can you blame any one thing, Joe, do you think?
I think that's the problem. Those of us who care about the community, we can't help but try to analyze and find fault or find solutions or how can we prevent something like this from happening. And it's very difficult to do that without assigning blame and without perhaps justifying things like this. And that's not anybody's intent. We do recognize, as you said in your opening words, Mike, that there are great divisions in this country, and some of the divisions are long-standing, and they do relate to race, and they relate to perception, and they relate to people viewing themselves as supporting police or supporting a minority community, and we can't see it that way. We can't allow ourselves to see it that way.
These divisions have been here for a long time, since slavery days. What it makes them different now? Is it the media that's amplified it? Is it social media? Everything's on tape? Is it camera?
I think one thing is that everybody has a camera now, and I think that in instant social media, the Diamond, I can't remember her last name, Reynolds. She live streamed the aftermath of the shooting of her fiance in Minneapolis, and I think that a lot of there've been conflicts, violent conflicts, motorists and police over the years, but the pervasiveness of cell phones and social media has shined a bright light on it.
And I think it's also given some people who felt like they didn't have a voice. I mean, the presence of mind of Diamond Reynolds to live stream this right as it was happening and the poise that she showed while she was doing this. I mean, a lot of people wouldn't have thought to do that, but it's very interesting that she did. And it gave all of us the opportunity to see what she saw and to give her side of the story unfiltered. And I think there are a lot of people who feel like without cell phones, they don't get involved because they're afraid of what might happen, but the cell phone allows them to get involved in a sense and to tell their side of the story.
There is a one thing that's present among some police officers and in some police agencies, an us against them mentality, that we are out there fighting the bad guys, the police are, and it's a us against them. Mike, does the shooting in Dallas worsen that?
You know, Mike, I think every policeman is an individual, and some of them it will, but I think a very small amount. The ones that really feel, you know, everybody's their enemy are gonna stay the way they are, and the other ones aren't. You know, I think a very small percentage of the police really feel that way, at least the ones I've been around, and they do so many wonderful things for people, regardless of their sex or race or anything, age. You know, they're good people. But we've got other ones that are too quick to make decisions. All these things are kind of spur of the moment, and tragically somebody ends up dead, and you see some of these films and you think, my goodness, how can that happen? I think really that, as Karen mentioned about the cameras, and I think it's going to be good. It's hard getting through it now, but when we see these over and over and over, I think it almost has to have an effect on certainly the police, that, you know, I've got to be doubly careful, because if I make a mistake, it's going to be all over the networks and my family. Everybody's going to get into this. Now, sometimes they'll do all the right things and still end up in error. That's what happens when you're a policeman.
Joe, lost in all, sometimes there are bad people out there. They're up to no good with guns that police face every day.
Absolutely, and the police do their best to protect us, and they do their best to come to our aid when we are in trouble. At the same time, we can't forget, and you touched on it just a second ago, Mike, and that is, we can't forget that there are policing and criminal justice issues that go beyond the issue of race. And there are issues of race that have nothing to do with law enforcement. I don't think that the frustration in us being able to reconcile those two things should prevent us from addressing those things separately and looking at police conduct and criminal justice and those things, even if it touches on race or even if it doesn't.
Okay. Now to the political divide. As far as the FBI and the Justice Department is concerned, Hillary Clinton is off the hook, but voters are not so sure. The FBI and Attorney General this week decided not to charge Clinton with a crime for using a home-based private email system while she was Secretary of State. That's not to say she did nothing wrong.
Although we did not find clear evidence that Secretary Clinton or her colleagues intended to violate laws governing the handling of classified information, there is evidence that they were extremely careless in their handling of very sensitive, highly classified information.
Comey contradicted Clinton's claim that the private email was for convenience and her claim that her emails did not include classified information. Republicans and Donald Trump are not about to let this issue go.
I always felt that Hillary Clinton would escape criminal charges for her dangerous and illegal behavior, because I always knew and I always see, and it's so sad, that our system is in fact rigged. It's totally rigged.
Laura Bischoff, latest poll here in Ohio has Hillary's trustworthiness rating. Only 37% of voters think she's trustworthy. What happens after this?
Well, I think that the Republicans, first off, you know, I think Trump had a golden opportunity in Cincinnati to capitalize on the FBI, the scathing rebuke from Director Comey. And he started off reading from notes and stuff, but then he just kind of went off on all these tangents, and he kind of blew the opportunity. And I think that Congress then calls this emergency hearing so they can bring Comey in to testify. And I think that the Republicans in Congress are trying to definitely keep the story alive, keep it going. She is very vulnerable on this honesty, trustworthiness, and I think they're going to keep chipping away at that. I think it's probably a good strategy by the Republicans.
Mike Miller, you're a former prosecutor. Given the evidence that you've understood as it is from news reports, was there enough evidence to prosecute her?
Well, I can't answer that, Mike. I can say this, that I think reasonable people can disagree. I don't think this was a slam dunk that she should have been indicted, despite what some of the Republicans say, nor do I think it was something that she was never going to be indicted. I think it was a very close call, and I can't really criticize the director for what he did.
So where does that line, how do you decide between a slam dunk that should be indicted and not indicted? How do you, on a case-by-case basis, putting this one aside, how do you decide that?
Well, it's the same in any case, Mike, whether it's a homicide, an armed robbery, a rape, anything. You look at the evidence and you think, is it there? And I think most people are foolish if it's simply probable cause. If you may have probable cause, but in your experience, you'll never win because it's not proof beyond reasonable doubt. So why go through the ordeal of indicting someone when in case you're going to lose and put, somebody through the problem, and in this case, the entire country. And I imagine that was a decision. He is a lawyer and he looks at things different ways, and that would be my thought. But you go through, you make that judgment on every case.
I agree with Mike, and actually the Director Comey, told us at the beginning of his narrative, if you look at the transcript, as to why he makes a distinction between carelessness on her part or recklessness, and recklessness is not included in this particular case, which would involve harm. The very first thing that he looked at, and he said the very first thing that we looked at, is whether the material became available to the enemies of the nation or to anybody that could have hacked it, and they couldn't find any credible evidence that it had.
I think the only person who won, perhaps, other than reporters who wanted to spend the whole day covering this, which there were a few, was Comey. I mean, he almost couldn't win with Republicans who were very skeptical, but he had, I thought, a tremendous presence. And when he spoke directly. He answered questions directly. He had a really good showing, so to speak, in terms of how he presented himself and his argument to these folks. And I mean, he sat there for 7 hours?
Yeah,
it was a long day. And so I think for a lot of people, he was the one who came out looking honest and truthful, maybe, though there are some that still don't believe that. There are plenty. I mean, Donald Trump is a classic example of somebody who has real questions about it. But I think for him to stand up there, take the questions, look me in the eye, as he said a couple of times, it was a good performance, I think, for him.
How about the timing of this whole story, Laura? I'm not sure if it's rigged as the right system, but it's suspicious. Every time that the State Department released emails that were on the server, it was Friday night, usually at the end of business, if not after the end of business. This happens July 5th, the day after the 4th of July, when many people are on vacation, not paying attention. This seems very suspicious.
People are going to pay attention to that, even if if you announce it on Christmas morning.
Okay.
I think that the press would be, out of their jammies and at their computers reporting on this immediately.
But if the viewers are on the beach not paying attention,
it's still got legs. I mean, I think it's a tried and true tactic on both Democrats and Republicans, all sorts of administrations, to do the Friday afternoon,
Take out the trash day.
The 3 o'clock surprise, and this is one with it that they may have thought about that, but it's certainly not gonna. It's not gonna dissuade the story.
And Comey swears up and down that he was in charge of when he made this announcement. Nobody influenced it.
I will say the public corruption cases that the FBI handles are highly sensitive. They get extraordinary amounts of additional review, and I would think this is probably the most sensitive case that they've ever handled.
And with the 24-hour news cycle on these slow days, these slow weekends, you can actually get more coverage of some of this stuff because there's nothing else going on. So you dump this stuff on a holiday weekend or the day after a holiday, and all of a sudden you've got a lot of people talking about it because there's nothing else happening.
But there's always someone who can fill that vacuum, and that's Donald Trump. And he was in suburban Cincinnati this week, where he gave new meaning to the term stream of consciousness. As Laura mentioned, it was a wildly rambling speech. He took on Hillary Clinton, NBC's Chuck Todd, President Obama, and defended his faint praise of Saddam Hussein.
But I said, bad guy, Saddam Hussein, bad guy. Then I said again, Saddam Hussein is a bad guy. But he did one thing well. He killed terrorists, right? That's okay. Just a quick statement. But I wanted to emphasize, because I know if I didn't emphasize, they'd say, I like Saddam Hussein. So I said it, I think 3 times, bad, bad, bad. In fact, I started repeating myself. I said, I don't like that. People are going to say, is that guy okay?
Karen Kassler, is that guy okay?
I don't know how to answer that question, Mike. I think it's interesting, though, that there were 2 stories that were out there about Donald Trump that were really not so good in terms of what he would like them to be portrayed at. This Saddam Hussein story, and also the story, the anti-Semitic star on
David.
Yes, exactly. So what did he talk about through most of the speech? Those things. I mean, he had the opportunity, like Laura said, to talk about Hillary Clinton and the emails. He did that for only 10 minutes of a speech that went on for an hour. And so this was, I think there are a lot of Republicans who are supporting him who feel like this was an opportunity for him to stay on message, to really push that. And he veered off, like you said, stream of consciousness. He was all over the place.
The New York Times called it self-sabotaging.
Yeah.
I mean,
But is it self-sabotaging? Because the conventional wisdom is you stay on message, you have your talking points, and that generally leads to success. This is not a conventional year, Mike. This is a year where that message and that craziness or that unorthodoxy works. Is there a method to his madness?
I don't know whether he actually plans this or that's just the way he is. I tend to think that's the way he is, that this is not, a political strategy on his part. That's just the way he responds to things, which isn't particularly impressive to a lot of people. But I do think in this year of anti-everything, there's a lot of people in both political parties who really think this is great because he's opposed to everything. He's not the politician that they've had to deal with the years. They're very dissatisfied with all politicians, and I think he's going to do well with many Democrats.
Well, I think he does in these settings really throw the meat to the crowd, so to speak. I mean, I think, when he started out with notes saying he wanted to talk about Hillary Clinton and then went off on these other areas. You can hear him throwing out comments that he knows are going to bring the audience in. That, I think, speaks to the kind of showbiz that he likes to talk about. He's talked about how he wants the convention to have more showbiz. He doesn't want anyone to fall asleep, like that's going to happen. But, I think that's part of what he's trying to do here. And it does take him off message. It does frustrate people who are used to seeing rallies and campaign events done a certain way, but this is the way he does it.
Well, and it's not just that he mentioned Saddam Hussein in a positive light. The information he gave about Saddam Hussein was just totally incorrect. Saddam Hussein was not bombing terrorists, he was bombing Kurds, who are now happen to be ISIS's greatest on-the-ground, boots-on-the-ground opponents, supported by the United States. And he had been offering money to individuals who would terrorize the United States before he was overthrown. So even that information is incorrect.
But not just that, Joe, but on so many of his policy areas, the bluster overshadows, Laura, the meat of what he would do. He's going to get ISIS. That's about as far as it is. He's going to bring back jobs through being tough on trade, but that's as deep as it goes. But we all pay attention to the bluster and the theatrics. Right,
because it's so eye-catching and it's so entertaining and it's so unusual. It's like nothing we've ever seen on a presidential campaign. And you're right. I mean, typically candidates try to avoid giving too much detail because once you roll out your detail, you get hammered, and your opponents are all over you, the press is all over you. But his policy statements you can't even call them policy statements because they are such a thin veneer. There's beyond just a one sentence of "I'll get ISIS" or "I'm going to build a wall."
And the statements that he does make, like Joe was just saying, fact checkers have said he's the most dishonest.
73% lies.
Yeah, I mean, he's had the most inaccurate statements of any candidate running, perhaps I think ever. And so, yeah, you've got that going for it as well as not being real clear on policy statements.
So, Mike Miller, how are Republicans viewing the upcoming convention in Cleveland and how it's going to turn out? As more and more folks are saying, okay, I will speak at the convention. Scott Walker, governor from Wisconsin, is going to speak now. A few others have come forward.
Well, I still think with a great deal of trepidation. I mean, I think it's going to be, everybody's going to be walking on eggs, so to speak, afraid of what might happen. I mean, maybe things will turn out well for the Republicans, maybe not. But I think they'll all be very, very glad when it's over. And then you just go on and see what happens.
Is there any chance that there's going to be a dump Trump movement at the convention?
I don't think so, Mike. I think that would create more chaos than just let it go like it is. He won all the states fair and square, so to speak, and I think if they do that, it'll be a disaster.
The Rules Committee does meet on Thursday, which will set the rules, and that could determine if anybody wanted to change the rules so that that Donald Trump didn't get the 1,237 delegates. It could potentially release delegates from having to vote, but it's very unlikely. I think most people have agreed that the Rules Committee is not going to do. It's going to be interesting to watch, but probably not going to do anything. It's going to deny Trump the nomination.
The Rules Committee is 108 people. They need, I think, 30 votes to issue even a minority report of, hey, let's unbind. Let's see if anybody wants to unbind the delegates, and that would have to go to a floor vote. I really think it's just very slim chances of any of that stuff bubbling up to actual reality.
Trump's going to have to say something completely off the wall. I mean, criminally off the wall almost to have that happen between now and when the convention
But I still
begins.
think there's going to be an undercurrent of that being talked about. So that's still out there. Even if it doesn't make the floor, that's still out there.
And what you say is not unlikely.
No, I mean, yeah, it's not. But where is that line and when does he cross it? That's the question. Next month, Columbus voters decide if Columbus City Council should change and expand to include members elected by districts or wards. Current members of council and the mayor don't like that idea. They say the all at-large council works fine, but this week they agreed to form a committee to look at changing the city charter, but after the special election.
The committee will look at the country's most successful cities and learn from them. How are their city governments structured? What works for them? What might Columbus adopt to make our city stronger and poised for the future?
They are against this because currently the 7 people have a concentration of power in this city. And you can see that they are fighting to maintain that power.
Joe Mas, what are the odds that this charter commission comes back with a form of government that has ward representatives on the city council?
I think it's very high, but
No, do you think
you're talking about the commission to study whether
Yes.
to do it. I think
You think they
actually,
recommend wards?
I think that they will recommend wards, to tell you the truth.
Wow.
However, not necessarily in the structure that has been advanced and that is represented by issue 1. That particular structure takes our 7-member city council system into a 13-member where 3 are elected at large, representing the entire city, just like all 7 of the current ones are. And then 10 will be representing individual wards, and those districts, those wards, will be reapportioned or redesigned every 10 years, just like congressional districts might be. And that's supposed to take politics out of it. But there are a number of problems associated with it, not the least of which is that this is going to be decided in a special election August the 2nd, where it's expected between 5 and 10% of the voters are going to vote.
The last time that happens was when the city imposed a 25% increase
Something
in the income
like that.
tax.
I was involved in that last one. That's right.
Well, but that was also August. Anyway, that's beside the point.
Beside the
So you think it's a ratio issue that if they were more at large than district council, this current council will go for it?
I think there is something to be said, and I have talked to people on both sides of the topic here. There is something to be said to satisfy the contact between people of the community and specific members of council. Because right now, one of the complaints that you hear is that I don't know who to call. And do you know somebody? And that would help answer that. But this is I think is a disaster.
Like you've been in city politics, county politics for a long time. Would a district representative on the city council, would that help or hurt the city?
Oh, I certainly don't think it would hurt. I think it might help. But when Joe mentioned this new plan or whatever to try and take the politics out of it, I don't think that's ever going to happen. I don't care what plan and who puts it in. There's going to be politics involved in everything. It's there's no panacea.
Mike and
I am a
agree on
skeptic.
that. I agree with you 100%.
But so does this is also a signal perhaps that they're a little worried that the voters might approve this law whenever there's a preemptive strike like this. We saw it with gambling at the State House, with the marijuana measure at the State House. Might there be a chance that they're worried?
Maybe. I do think it's curious that they're putting it on the August 2nd. I think there's so few people paying attention to this that they could make whatever change they want.
But look, if you have what 39,000 people I think that signed the petition, and you've got 5% coming out, you could have all 39,000 coming out, and You know, I mean, you don't have to be a
Maybe
rocket scientist.
there's probably a lot of the 39,000 that don't realize they even signed that.
Probably, you're right. You're right.
Well, the
So
city
there
charter,
we are, right?
The city charter mandated that it had to be on this in the August election. So anyway, off the record comment time. Mike Miller, you're up first.
Well, I think I'm going up to Cleveland, but not for the convention. I'm going for the Yankees this weekend.
The Yankees or the Indians?
Well, I'm going for the Indians,
There
but
you
they
go.
play the Yankees. But I think the following week, I'm guessing that Newt Gingrich is going to be the vice presidential candidate for Donald Trump.
The man who said there was 1 in 1,000% chance that he would get that.
Yeah, I agree with Mike.
Joe.
And I think Mike will also help participate in a march in support of immigration reform taking place in Cleveland, organized by the communities of faith. The organizers are renewing their efforts for comprehensive immigration reform since the Supreme Court had the non-decision, the 4-4 non-decision regarding the president's deferred action program.
Okay.
Well, Monday, the Ohio Department of Education was supposed to start its attendance review of ECOT, the state's largest online charter school and the 9th largest school district in the state. Well, ECOT is now sued to stop that from happening, saying that they want to stop what they call a bait and switch to reevaluate and readjust ECOT's funding based on its student attendance. They say it's based on an improperly promulgated rule, so this should be very interesting.
And Laura.
I'm looking forward to covering the Republican National Convention up in Cleveland. I think that Trump's acceptance speech will be like none other. And
Assuming he accepts.
right. And I would really hope that people would remember that we're all human beings and to take a breath and don't do anything violent.
Amen. And next week, I urge you to watch because we celebrate a milestone, our 500th episode of Columbus on the Record next week. 3 panelists on next week's show were on the very first show that we did about 10 years ago. So check out next week. We'll see some old pictures. That's Columbus on the Record for this week. Check us out online. For our crew and for our panel, I'm Mike Thompson. Have a good week.